Welcome to Creepshow, your portal into the dark and twisted world of history's most terrifying minds. Some people are born to create, others to destroy. But there are those whose dark desires lead them down a path so sinister they become nightmares that haunt generations. From chilling cold cases to infamous killers whose names still send shivers down our spines, today we dive deep into the stories of 20 of the most notorious serial killers the world has ever seen. Brace yourselves for a journey into pure evil. Number 1. The Zodiac Killer. This individual is a well-known serial killer. Through a series of taunting letters that he sent to the Bay Area press, the murderer came up with this name for himself. Only one of the 4 ciphers that he transmitted was successfully deciphered, despite the fact that he left them to be deciphered. Between the late 1960s and the early 1970s, the murderer was active in the state of California. His most recent letter stated, "I am 37 years old, and the San Francisco Police Department is 0. He asserted that he had killed 37 people, but the newspapers only confirmed that he had killed 7. Currently, the case file is still open. Number 2. Donald Henry Gaskins, the Hitchhiker's Killer. Gaskins asserts that he was responsible for the deaths of between 80 and 90 individuals by torturing and mutilating them. He began his murderous career in 1969, when he began picking up hitchhikers on the roadways that ran along the coast of the American South. The confession was made to the authorities by a criminal accomplice who had observed him killing 2 young lads. He was first given a sentence of death, but it was later changed to life in jail without the possibility of parole. Gaskins became the only guy in history to have ever been responsible for the death of a person who was on death row. He added another murder to his record. Number 3. Tsutomu Miyazaki, the Human Dracula. In addition to that, he is one of the most well-known serial killers. The heinous deeds he committed earned him other names. The Little Girl Murderer, the Otaku Murderer, and Dracula Miyazaki were a few of the films that caught their attention. One of the reasons for this is that he kidnapped young girls, murdered them, and then engaged in sexual acts with their bodies after they had been dead. During one instance, he not only consumed the victim's hand, but also drank her blood that she had just given him. Additionally, he sent postcards to the families of the victims, during which he described the murder and preserved body pieces as trophies. Miyazaki was executed by hanging in 2008, when he was 45 years old. His father had committed himself. Number 4. Ted Bundy, the Crazy Necrophile. Ted Bundy was a serial killer, kidnapper, rapist, and necrophile who made his home in the United States. He admitted to the murder of 30 women and operated in a number of places across the United Places. He went back to areas where crimes had been committed and engaged in sexual actions with the deceased. There were at least 12 victims that Bundy beheaded, and he stored the skulls of those victims as trophies in his apartment. Bundy was executed by electric chair in 1989 when he was 42 years old. His own defense attorney remarked that Ted exemplified the precise essence of a cruel and wicked person. Number 5. Jack the Ripper, aka Whitechapel Murder. The actual perpetrators of the murders or killers were never found. In light of the fact that the victims were missing organs, and judging by the process, the perpetrator appeared to have prior experience in surgical procedures, the name was conceived. Between the years 1888 and 1891, Jack the Ripper, who was later thought to be a single individual, was responsible for the murders of female prostitutes in the slums of London. Number 6. Luis Garavito, the Beast. The Colombian is perhaps one of the most heinous serial killers in the world. Media outlets have also referred to him as the Beast, which is another name for La Bestia. He admitted to taking the lives of 147 young boys, as well as torturing and raping them. However, it is thought that the number is greater than 300. The jury decided that he was responsible for 139 charges, which would result in a sentence of 1,853 years in jail. But according to the legislation of Colombia, the maximum sentence is 30 years, which is what he was given in 1999. Because of his cooperation and good behavior, he might be released earlier than expected. Number 7. Ahmad Siraji, the Sorcerer. A cattle farmer from Indonesia admits to being responsible for the deaths of 42 females and girls between the years 1986 and 1997. He used to bury them up to his waist as part of his ritual that he performed. A sugarcane field was the location where the bodies were discovered, and the heads of the deceased were facing his house. He believed that this would give him more authority. In 2008, Siraji was given a sentence of death at the hands of a firing squad. Number 8. The chessboard killer, Alexander Pichushkin. The chessboard killer and the Bitsa Park maniac were two other names that were used to refer to him. Those he targeted were homeless males, and he used vodka to entice them to come to his domicile. It is thought that he was responsible for the deaths of 49 individuals. The most of them were caused by repeated blows to the head with a hammer, and he later placed a vodka bottle into the gaping skull wound. In the beginning, he disclosed that his objective was to kill 64 individuals and finish the amount of squares on a chessboard. Additionally, it is thought that he was in competition with another serial killer from Russia named Andrei Chikatilo, who was discovered guilty of 53 murders in 1992 and sentenced to life in prison. It was the same year that Alexander went on to commit his first murder. Number 9. Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher. According to Andrei, the butcher of Rostov, when I used my knife, it brought me a sense of psychological relief. I'm well aware that I must be annihilated. I was a natural blunder that I made. Over the course of the period between 1978 and 1990 in Russia, he was responsible for the sexual assault, murder, and mutilation of 53 women and children. He was taken into custody in 1992, and in 1994, he was given the order to be executed by a firing squad and executed. Number 10. Charles Edmund Cullen, the Angel of Death. Cullen was employed as a nurse at a number of hospitals. Nevertheless, he was frequently terminated from his positions due to his suspicious behavior at a number of these facilities. Between the years 1984 and 2003, he admitted to killing 40 elderly patients in the state of New Jersey. It was through the use of unapproved medication that he was able to cause the deaths of his patients. His statement was that he desired to alleviate the suffering of the patients in a manner that is comparable to that of an angel. According to the experts, he affected more than 300 people. A life sentence has been handed down to Cullen. Number 11. Patrick Wayne Kerney, the trash bag killer. Between the years 1975 and 1977, he was active and was also known as the trash bag killer. In spite of the fact that Kerney had a high IQ, he admitted to killing 32 homosexual individuals after he was apprehended. As a result of Kerney's practice of dumping their bodies beside highways in California and wrapping them in trash bags, the moniker was given to the practice. Despite the fact that he was found guilty of 21 killings, he was given a sentence of life in prison upon his confession. Number 12. Dennis Rader, BTK murderer. Wichita, Kansas was the location of 10 murders committed by Dennis Rader between the years 1974 and 1991. He also used the moniker BTK, which stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, to send letters to the police in which he taunted them regarding their actions. His method consisted of following his victims around at first, then breaking into their homes, securing their limbs with bindings, and lastly strangling them. He vanished in 1988, but he reappeared around the year 2005, when he contributed to the investigation by sending a floppy disk to the media, which assisted in locating him. In light of the fact that Rader admitted to his crimes, he is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences, with the earliest potential parole date that is February 26, 2180. Number 13. John George Hay, acid bath murderer. In the 1940s, John George Hay, who was also known as the acid bath murderer, was a serial killer who committed his crimes. In spite of the fact that he falsely claimed to have killed 9 individuals, he was found guilty of murdering 6 of them. In his capacity as a skilled con artist, he used his charm and cunning to entice wealthy individuals into a warehouse, where he then proceeded to murder them. After that, he would use sulfuric acid to disintegrate their bodies, and then he would fake documents in order to sell their belongings and collect their savings from their lives. He received a death sentence and was executed by hanging in the year 1949. Number 14. Paul Knowles, the Casanova Killer. Knowles, who is also known as the Casanova Killer, utilized his charisma to successfully convince his victims to believe him, and then he went on to kill them. In total, he was responsible for the deaths of 18 people, although the number could be higher. Men, women, and children were among those who fell victim to him. The man from Florida was eventually put to death by an FBI agent in 1974 while he was attempting to flee from the authorities. Number 15. William Bonin, the Freeway Killer. Additionally, Bonin was referred to as the Freeway Killer. From 1979 to 1980, he was responsible for the sexual assault, torture, and murder of at least 21 young men. In South California, Bonin would dispose of their dead by dumping them beside roadways. In 1996, he was put to death by having a fatal injection administered to him after being found guilty of 14 of his murders. Even when he was serving his term, he continued to exhibit his sadistic tendencies by communicating with the relatives of many of his victims to learn how their children responded to the pain he inflicted on them. Number 16. Aileen Wuornos, the Monster. It was because of her tale that Charlize Theron was able to win an Academy Award. The film Monster from 2003 featured her in the role of Aileen. Aileen admitted to shooting 7 men in Florida while she was working as a prostitute. She claimed that all of the guys had either raped her or attempted to rape her. Aileen killed the men for their money. In 1992, she passed away as a result of a fatal injection. Number 17. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Between the years 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was responsible for the dismemberment of 17 males and 3 males. Necrophilia was another one of Dahmer's many vices. He would prepare various portions of his victims' bodies and then consume them. After a potential victim was able to overcome him, he was eventually apprehended and brought to justice. It was in 1992 when Dahmer was given a sentence of 15 periods of life imprisonment. 2 years later, however, he was murdered by a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution. He was battered to death. Number 18. John Wayne Gacy, the Burial King. Between the years 1972 and 1978, Gacy was active in the Chicago, Illinois area. He murdered and sexually raped 33 young men and boys in their teenage years. Using the promise of work or money, Gacy would entice his victims to come to his house, where he would then proceed to strangle them with a tourniquet before committing the murder. Later, he disposed of the bodies of his victims by throwing them into the Des Plaines River. He had buried 26 of his victims in the crawl space under his house. Gacy was found guilty of 33 murders and condemned to death. He was placed on death row for a period of 14 years before being put to death by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Number 19. Tommy Lynn Sells, the Brutal Texan. It's possible that Tommy Lynn Sells is the most dangerous Texan in the history of the state. As many as 70 individuals, he asserted, had been murdered by him. Between 1985 and 1999, he committed a series of heinous murders, including the stabbing of a girl who was only 13 years old 16 times. There was a girl who was 10 years old when Sells broke into her bedroom, stabbed her, and then abandoned her to die. In spite of the injuries she sustained, she emerged from the ordeal alive and provided the authorities with a comprehensive account of Sells. He was given a death sentence and is currently being held on death row in a high-security prison in the state of Texas. Number 20. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, the Brazilian maniac. Pedro was taken into custody in 1973, and upon his subsequent conviction in 2003, he was found guilty of the murder of at least 71 individuals. He was then sentenced to 128 years in jail. It was only when he was 14 years old that he committed his first murder. As a kind of retribution for the murder of his girlfriend while he was incarcerated, he caused widespread destruction among the local drug traffickers. He also carried out the execution of his own father, who was also serving time for murder while he was inside. Following his incarceration, Filho went on to murder at least 47 other prisoners. The fact that he has continued to commit murders has resulted in his sentence being enhanced to 400 years in jail. These names are more than just the stuff of horror movies. They are grim reminders of the darkness that can lurk within humanity. As we've explored these infamous killers and their horrifying crimes, remember that these stories are not just tales, but tragic events that took lives, shattered families, and left communities scarred. If you're intrigued by the shadows and want to learn more about the world's darkest mysteries, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.